were the giants sterile? When it comes to hybridization, there are certain kinds of hybrids in nature that when you blend them together, they end up sterile. They can't reproduce. So because of that, some Nephilim researchers think the giants were sterile. I don't agree with that at all, because we see scripture like this saying, sons of Anak. So clearly they're not sterile. We see in 2 Samuel 21, born to the giant. Also born to the giant, right, in 2 Samuel 12. So clearly they're not sterile. They're having offspring. Which then brings us to the question of suspicious women and the rise of the X-Men. Were there female Nephilim too? I believe there were. Why else would there be a command to utterly destroy the women? Why? I mean, that's an unanswerable question if there weren't Nephilim females also. And it really paints God in a very bad light, furthermore. Again, we have these scriptures right here talking about, utterly destroy these nations, the Amorites, the Hittites, etc. But it also says, don't marry them. Don't get involved sexually with them. Well, there must be something to it. When you look through the various mythologies of the ancient world, you see there are male and female gods, if you will. Josephus, again, remember, likened the first generation Nephilim to the Titans of Greek mythology. Well, in the Greek myths, you had male and female Titans paired off, as you see there. You also see a number of places, even in the scriptures, to various goddesses of differing forms, as we see here, Diana of the Ephesians, Ashtoreth of the Zidonians, of course, the Queen of Heaven. Then I would say, when you look in the historical record, you find some interesting characters like these, Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And these guys show up, they reigned in the mid-1300s BC time frame, so it's pretty early on, these guys are showing up. Well, these guys, the Egyptians, came from Mitzrayim, son of Ham. When you look at Nefertiti in particular, and some of the headdresses that these people wear, they're not just fancy hats. These guys are covering up one heck of a dome of a head. They have some big heads going on there, and you see busts like this of their children. Right? We've got the conehead skulls in the back that Joe has, and I've got a couple back there as well. You see skulls like this. This was from a December 2012 news article. It said, the incredible alien skull discovered in a Mexican cemetery, 1,000-year-old skeleton. Archaeologists in Mexico today revealed the astonishing skull of a person suffering from cranial disfiguration. Really?
Yeah, I mean, look at the geology, too.
Really?
Like the bone to a Roswell.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same kind of thing. No, these people are born this way, and you see evidence like this, with apparently a mummy, a pregnant woman, a mummy of a pregnant woman was found with apparently a fetus inside of it. The artist did a drawing of the 7-month-old fetus. It looks like alien. This thing was born that way. Judd and others have done an analysis of the skulls, and we have a frontal lobe and 2 parietal plates and occipital plate. We've got that vertical line going across the top of her head. You look at the skulls back there, they don't have that vertical line going across the top of the head. So yeah, cranial deformation, sure, you could strap boards to a baby's head and change the shape of its skull over time. What possesses proud parents to say, hey honey, I want to make my kid into a cone head. You okay with that? Sure, let's go strap boards to the babies. Why are they doing that? They're doing that to emulate something. When you look at some of these conehead characters, they're often from positions of royalty. You think that might give your child a leg up if he just happened to be walking around looking like a conehead in school? Right? They're trying to emulate something that was real. These people are born that way. And some of these skulls have upwards of 25, 30, 40%, sometimes more cranial capacity. So strapping boards to somebody's head is going to change the shape of the skull, but it's not going to give you increased increased brain capacity. No. These people are born this way. Here's another one. I call this the first Home Alone. Oh no! I have a cone head. Look at the size of that kid's head. It's almost as big as his body. Huge. The skull that I have back there is a replica, somewhat famous skull. It's shown up on a number of magazines and book covers and whatnot. This is sort of a cross-section of it. You can kind of see superimposed over a normal-sized skull how much larger the brain was compared to a comparable-sized normal skull, right? And then some artists decided to put clay on it to to model what this person may have looked like. And it's my question is, okay, you've got Akhenaten and Nefertiti already showing up in positions of royalty 1300 BC. These guys are, the Peru and those guys are much, much, much later. I believe they came from probably the Egyptian conehead varieties that maybe migrated in the Nephilim diaspora, if you will. Joshua and his boys did a good job of wiping the Canaanites out, right? But they didn't get all of them, did they? No. David came in and got a lot of the ones that Joshua's boys didn't take care of. He didn't get them all either, though, because Solomon's conscripting them, interestingly enough, to build the temple of Solomon. If you go read who built the temple, it's Nephilim. And it tells you right there, 1 Kings chapter 9, these are the ones that Joshua and those guys failed to take out. Very interesting. So you have a number of purges in the land where you have a diaspora of Nephilim going out. I know Judd's doing some work on it. I think LA is too. I'm also working on some stuff. All of us kind of independently doing this. Yes?
I'm right at an hour. How much more you got, Rob?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Looks like 7 slides. Is that good? Is that cool? All right. So it's my speculation that the women that got on the ark may have been something like that. They don't have to be giants. It just says all flesh had become corrupted. So could they have looked like that? And maybe that doesn't suit your fancy. So how about maybe something like this? Huh? They're still emulating, minus the increased intellectual capacity. Right? I mean, and even some of the depictions of Nefertiti, I mean, she's not too bad. Yeah, she's got a cone head, but she's got a great personality.
That middle one, is that what that one? They got it too, doesn't it?
No, it's just headdress. You know, the hairstyle. So, I begin to wonder that, we're the original X-Men. We got all these movies of X-Men and things like that. These are just people who are basically hybrids. They're mutants. They have various mutations in their genetics that allow them to do different things. So could that be the case of what we're looking at in the immediate pre- and then post-flood return of the Nephilim? I don't know. It is interesting that this particular X-Men person, whatever, just so happens to have 6 toes in reality. Things that make you go, All right. Here's something that's going to kind of bring think of everything that I just said and then watch what these scientists are saying. They're not talking about Nephilim, but if you apply what I've been saying to what they're saying, I think you'll get the picture.
The human genome is like a Bible where everything was written down. The hope and the expectation was that once we had that book in front of us and all the letters, we could just read down the pages and we would understand how the body was put together.
They estimated that the human genome, the book of life, would contain around 100,000 genes.
And then when they started sequencing, they popped down to 60, and then it popped down to 50. And slowly it went down to a much smaller number.
30,000, 25,000. As the mapping drew to an end, it appeared that humans had about the same number of genes as fish and mice.
In fact, we found out that the human genome is probably not as complex and doesn't have as many genes as plants do. So that then made us really question, well, if the genome has less genes in this species versus this species, and we're more complex potentially, what's going on here?
So few genes didn't appear enough to explain human complexity. Even more startling, it turned out the same key genes that make a fruit fly, a worm, or a mouse also make a human. Chimpanzees share 98.9% of our genome. So what accounts for the vast differences between species? Might genes not be the whole story?
What is it that makes our cells different from one another? What makes them look and behave differently? What is it that makes a muscle cell, for instance, look different from a neuron? After all, these cells contain exactly the same DNA, but it's their epigenetic instructions that help tell them which genes to turn on and which ones to turn off. And with those different genes at play, these can become very different cells.
As epigenetic therapy takes off, so do the expectations for this new science. Many believe that a multitude of complex diseases, from Alzheimer's to autism, may have epigenetic triggers. Something that could control genes directly, switch them on or off. But how exactly did these tags go about silencing a gene? This odd strain of agouti mice provides a visual clue. Despite the difference in color and size, they're twins, genetically identical.
Mice contain a gene called agouti, which makes them obese and yellow and susceptible to diseases like cancer and diabetes. This gene and these traits can be passed down from generation to generation through DNA, so that an agouti mother will give rise to a fat, yellow, disease-susceptible offspring if that offspring contains the agouti gene. Now here's something interesting about the agouti gene. It can be turned off if silencing epigenetic marks accumulate around it. So, if a pregnant agouti mother is fed a diet which is supplemented with these silencing epigenetic marks, those marks will be chemically transmitted to the DNA of her embryo, where they'll accumulate around that agouti gene and effectively turn it off. Her embryo will maintain those marks, and so it will be born and grow up to be an adult mouse that's thin and brown and healthy. Even though this mother is genetically identical at the DNA level to both sets of these offspring.
So what switched the agouti gene off in the thin mouse? A chemical tag called a methyl molecule. Composed of carbon and hydrogen, it affixes near the agouti gene, shutting it down. Living creatures possess millions of tags like these. Some, like methyl molecules, attach to DNA directly. Other types grab the proteins called histones around which DNA wraps and tighten or loosen them to turn genes on or off.
And in simple terms, this contact can be thought of as hugging the DNA. And if these proteins hug the DNA very tightly, then it is hidden from view for the cell, and a gene that is hidden cannot be utilized.
These tags and others control gene expression through a vast network in the body called the epigenome.
Epigenetics literally translates into just meaning above the genome. So if you would think, for example, of the genome as being like a computer, the hardware of a computer, the epigenome would be like the software that tells the computer when to work, and how much.
What distinguishes cells is not their genes, but how these genes are switched on or off by epigenetics.
And as development unfolds, certain switches need to be thrown. Then you can think of it as a light switch. Switch on the gene, the light is shining, the gene is active, makes a cell do a certain thing. Or the light switch is off, everything is dark, that gene is off.
To turn off the overactive agouti gene, researchers gave pregnant mothers foods rich in vitamins like B12 or folic acid, from which they could make those methyl tags that silence genes. The change was small, the effect huge. Fat yellow mothers gave birth to thin brown pups, no longer prone to disease. Agouti mice revealed the impact of an epigenetic change, one that occurred without altering a single chemical letter in the agouti gene.
I knew that epigenetics existed. I knew that it was a controlling factor for DNA activity, whether genes are silenced or not. But to say that epigenetics would have a major role in disease development, so I had no concept for that. The fact that this could have such a huge impact and could explain a whole host of things we couldn't explain before.
The implications, if they apply to humans, are sobering. If the thousands of genes identified by the Human Genome Project symbolized the words in the Book of Life, it was the epigenome that determined how that book got read.
Does that make a little more sense?